Maybe try getting a real job like normal people, my wife's dad said at the family brunch. Stop this consulting nonsense. I smiled politely. Monday morning, his CEO called him in. Corporate is restructuring. You'll meet the new owner today. I walked into his conference room. Look, I've survived a lot of things in my 32 years on this planet. College finals fueled entirely by Red Bull and spite. A cross-country road trip with a broken AC in August. That time I accidentally replied all to a company email calling the CEO's strategy aggressively stupid. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for the unique form of psychological warfare known as Sunday brunch with my wife's family. Picture this. It's 11 a.m. on a gorgeous Sunday morning. Normal people are sleeping off hangovers, binge-watching true crime documentaries, or doing literally anything that doesn't involve voluntary suffering. But me? I'm sitting at the Ivy Garden, because of course it's called something pretentious like that, watching my father-in-law Gerald Baxter treat a mimosa like it's a prop in his one-man show titled Disappointment, A Father-in-Law's Perspective. Gerald's one of those guys who peaked in 1997 and never quite got the memo that the world moved on. You know the type. Thinks wearing a Rolex makes him Warren Buffett, refers to his golf handicap in casual conversation, and genuinely believes synergy is still a cool thing to say in meetings. He's got that whole regional director energy, which basically means he's important enough to be insufferable, but not important enough for anyone to actually care. Maybe try getting a real job like normal people, he announced, loud enough that I swear the hostess 3 tables over paused mid-pour. His voice had that performative quality of someone who desperately needs strangers to validate his opinions. Stop this consulting nonsense. Ah yes, the consulting nonsense. My favorite topic. Right up there with root canals and Twitter discourse. I felt Clara's heel connect with my shin under the table, our secret marital Morse code for please don't make this worse. Her sister Lindsay, bless her heart, giggled into her mimosa like she'd been waiting all week for Dad to roast me. She probably had. Lindsay's the type who gets genuine entertainment from other people's discomfort. She's like if Schadenfreude became a person and then got a Pinterest account. Consulting, Gerald continued, because why stop when you're on a roll, is just code for unemployed but good at PowerPoint. He leaned back in his chair with the satisfied smile of a man who thinks he just dropped the mic on a TED Talk stage. I reached for the butter with the calm of a Buddhist monk who'd achieved enlightenment, or at least the calm of a guy who'd already bought his father-in-law's company and was just waiting for the right moment to drop that particular truth bomb. Literally bought it. Signed papers, wire transfers, the whole 9 yards. But Gerald didn't know that yet, and that made every second of this brunch absolutely worth it. You know what they say about consultants, Gerald? I replied, spreading butter on my toast with surgical precision. We're just people who borrow your watch to tell you what time it is, then keep the watch. I took a bite. But hey, at least we're honest about it. Clara's mother, Patricia, made that disapproving TSK sound that mothers-in-law have somehow trademarked. She's the type of woman who says, bless your heart, but means, I hope you step on a Lego. She was wearing pearls, actual pearls, at brunch. Who does that? People who think Downton Abbey is a documentary. That's who. Leo makes good money consulting. Clara offered weakly, trying to throw me a life raft in this sea of family judgment. Money isn't everything, sweetheart, Gerald said, patting Clara's hand like she was 6 years old and had just suggested she wanted to be a princess when she grew up. Stability is. Benefits. A 401k. Things real professionals have. If sarcasm burned calories, I'd have been in Olympic shape at that moment. I could have competed in the sarcasm decathlon and taken home gold. But I just smiled and nodded, letting Gerald enjoy his moment. Let him have his little victory lap. Let him feel like the big man at the table, dispensing career advice to the disappointing son-in-law who just couldn't seem to get his act together. My brother-in-law Derek, Lindsay's husband, sat there nodding along like one of those bobblehead dolls you see in car windows. Derek works in insurance and thinks talking about actuarial tables is riveting conversation. He's about as exciting as watching paint dry in slow motion, but at least he's consistent. You know exactly what you're getting with Derek, a guy who peaked when he made regional sales manager and has been dining out on that achievement for 7 years. I'm just saying, Gerald continued, because apparently we weren't done here. At your age, you should have something to show for yourself. A title, a desk, business cards that don't say consultant like it's a dirty word. I took a sip of my coffee, overpriced, pretentious coffee that probably had a backstory about fair trade beans harvested by monks in Guatemala, and smiled. You're absolutely right, Gerald. I should really step up my game. Clara shot me a look that said, what are you planning? She knows me too well. 6 years of marriage will do that. She can read my expressions like a book, and right now I was apparently broadcasting, I'm up to something, in neon letters. The waiter appeared with our entrees, and I watched Gerald cut into his eggs Benedict like he was performing surgery. Everything this man does is calculated for maximum performance value. He probably practices eating in front of a mirror to make sure he looks sufficiently executive-like while chewing. You know what your problem is, Leo? Gerald asked, because apparently rhetorical questions are his love language. You don't take things seriously enough. Business is serious. Career building is serious. You can't just float from client to client, making PowerPoints and calling it a living. You're right. I agreed, reaching for the pepper. I should definitely find something more substantial, more permanent. Maybe even take over a company or something. Really commit, you know? Lindsay snorted. Patricia's pearls practically clutched themselves. Derek bobblehead some more. And Clara's foot found my shin again, harder this time. But Gerald? Gerald just nodded sagely, completely missing the joke. Now you're talking sense. That's the kind of ambition I like to hear. Maybe there's hope for you yet. I buttered another piece of toast and let him have his moment of misplaced pride. Tomorrow morning was going to be spectacular. Tomorrow morning, Gerald Baxter was going to walk into his office at Baxter Industries, straighten his tie, pour his coffee, and prepare for another day of Regional Director ING. And then he was going to meet his new boss. Me, the consultant, the PowerPoint guy, the disappointing son-in-law who couldn't get a real job. I was going to own his company, his literal, actual company. And he had absolutely no idea. If Karma had a gift shop, I'd just maxed out my rewards card. More mimosas, anyone? The waiter asked brightly. Yes, I said, raising my glass. I'm celebrating. Celebrating what? Patricia asked suspiciously. I smiled. Sunday. Beautiful Sunday. Nothing more. Tomorrow, though? Tomorrow I'd be celebrating justice. Sweet, perfectly timed, absolutely delicious justice. But for now, I'd just sit here, eat my overpriced eggs, and watch Gerald perform his greatest hit. I'm important, and you're not, a musical. The encore was going to be legendary. So here's the thing about Gerald Baxter that you need to understand. The man doesn't know when to quit. It's like he's got some internal alarm that goes off every 5 minutes reminding him to say something condescending. Most people would land one good insult at brunch and call it a day, maybe save some ammunition for Thanksgiving. Not Gerald. Gerald approaches family gatherings like he's training for the Judgment Olympics. And today, he was going for gold. He leaned in across the table with that look. You know the one, where older guys think they're about to drop some serious wisdom on you. That, I'm going to change your life with this advice, son energy. Except he wasn't my dad. Thank God. And the only thing he was about to change was my opinion of how much patience I actually had. The smell hit me first. A cologne that I'm pretty sure was discontinued when people still thought Blockbuster would make a comeback. It was aggressive, this cologne. The kind that walks into a room 5 minutes before the person wearing it does. Mixed with that particular brand of overconfidence that only comes from being moderately successful in middle management for 20 years, Gerald was basically a walking time capsule of 1998's worst decisions. You know, Leo, he said, and I already knew this was going to be good. Any sentence that starts with you know, Leo from Gerald is basically a guarantee that I'm about to get lectured. When I was your age, I had a corner office, a company car, and real stock options. Real stock options. He said it like he was describing the Holy Grail. Like having stock options in a pharmaceutical company that specialized in questionable pain management solutions was the pinnacle of human achievement. I half expected him to start describing his 401k match like it was a romantic sonnet. Yeah, I replied, keeping my voice perfectly pleasant. And rotary phones too, right? Good times. I took a sip of my coffee. Bet you had to walk uphill both ways to the office too. In the snow. Barefoot. The table went silent. Like, you could hear the ambient jazz music from the restaurant speakers kind of silent. The kind of silence that happens in movies right before someone throws a punch or declares their undying love. Patricia's fork stopped midair, a piece of cantaloupe trembling on the tines. Lindsay's eyes went wide with that mix of horror and delight that only comes from watching someone else get in trouble. And Derek? Poor Derek looked like he was watching a car accident in slow motion and couldn't decide whether to look away or grab popcorn. My brother-in-law actually snorted into his pancakes. Literal snort. Syrup went up his nose, and he started coughing while trying not to laugh. Lindsay smacked his shoulder, but even she was fighting a smile. There's something universally satisfying about watching someone poke the bear, even if that bear is your own father-in-law, and the poker is your sister's husband, who really should know better. Gerald recovered faster than I expected. Give him credit. The man's had practiced dealing with people who don't automatically bow to his wisdom. Probably from decades of middle management meetings where someone occasionally had the audacity to question his quarterly projections. You can laugh, he said, straightening his tie like that somehow gave him authority. But men with real jobs have stability. Responsibility. You can't keep floating from client to client pretending to be important. Pretending to be important. Man, that one landed exactly how he wanted it to. The table shifted uncomfortably. Clara's hand found mine under the table, squeezing it in that way that meant both, I love you, and please God don't make this worse. Patricia made a sound that was half gasp, half vindication, like Gerald had just scored the winning point in a debate she'd been having with herself about whether I was worthy of her daughter. But here's what Gerald didn't know, what none of them knew sitting at that table with their mimosas and their judgment. I wasn't pretending anything. I was the real deal. I just happened to be the real deal in a way that didn't fit Gerald's 1990s corporate playbook of success. Oh, I'm not pretending, I said, meeting his eyes with the kind of calm that comes from having an absolutely nuclear secret in your back pocket. I charge per hour for being important. Big difference. I picked up my water glass. See, when you're actually important, people pay you just to show up. When you pretend to be important, you get a corner office and a nameplate. Different leagues, Gerald. Clara whispered urgently next to me. Leo, please. Her voice had that edge of desperation mixed with amusement. 6 years together means she knows exactly when I'm about to go from playful sarcasm to nuclear warfare. We were currently at DEFCON 3 and climbing. I turned to her and winked, just trying to live up to the family standard of humility. Lindsay actually laughed out loud at that one. She tried to cover it with a cough, but it came out like a seal barking. Patricia shot her a look that could have frozen lava, but the damage was done. Even Derek was grinning into his coffee cup like he'd just witnessed the most exciting thing to happen at a family brunch since Uncle Ted got drunk and told everyone his real opinion about the Electoral College. Gerald's face was doing something interesting. It cycled through several shades of red, like a mood ring having an existential crisis. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. For a beautiful moment, I thought he might actually let it go. Maybe pack up his ego and retreat to fight another day. But no, this is Gerald we're talking about. The man who once spent 45 minutes at Christmas dinner explaining why his fantasy football strategy was applicable to real business management. Quitting isn't in his vocabulary. Probably because it would require admitting defeat, and Gerald Baxter doesn't admit defeat. He just reframes it as a learning opportunity and moves on. The difference between you and me, Leo, he said, leaning back in his chair with renewed confidence, is that I built something. I climbed the ladder. I earned respect in my industry. What have you built? A roster of clients who might drop you the second someone cheaper comes along. It was a good shot, I'll give him that. Aimed right at the insecurity that every consultant secretly carries around like a backpack full of rocks. Are we really valuable? Or are we just expensive band-aids? Do we actually solve problems? Or do we just make PowerPoints about solving problems while the real workers do the actual work? But the thing is, I'd stopped worrying about that question about 6 months ago. Right around the time my firm started acquiring companies instead of just advising them. Right around the time we'd built up enough capital and credibility to go from consultants to actual owners. Right around the time we'd signed the papers on Baxter Industries. You're absolutely right, Gerald, I said, and I meant it. Sort of. You built something impressive. Really, genuinely impressive. I paused, letting the sincerity sink in. And I'm looking forward to seeing how all that hard work translates now that there's new ownership. It was subtle. So subtle that it flew right over his head like a paper airplane in a hurricane. Clara caught it, though. I felt her hand tighten on mine, and when I glanced at her, her eyes were wide with the realization of what I'd just said. She mouthed no at me, but she was smiling. That's love, right there. Being married to someone who simultaneously wants to murder you and high-five you. Gerald just nodded, completely missing the subtext. Well, at least you can admit when someone's more successful than you. That's growth, Leo. Real growth. Oh, I'm growing all the time, I said cheerfully. In fact, I'd say my career is expanding faster than I ever imagined. It's really quite exciting. Lindsay was looking at me suspiciously now. She's sharper than she lets on, my sister-in-law. Plays the ditzy socialite role well, but there's a brain behind all that hair product and Instagram filtering. Why do you look so happy about this? She asked. Dad's literally roasting you, and you're smiling like you won the lottery. Maybe I just appreciate family bonding time, I said innocently. These moments are precious. We should treasure them. Derek looked confused. Patricia looked suspicious. Clara looked terrified and delighted in equal measure. And Gerald? Gerald looked satisfied. Like he'd completed his Sunday morning mission of reminding everyone at the table why he was the successful one and I was just the consultant who married well. The waiter brought the check, and Gerald grabbed it with the flourish of a man making a point. I've got this, he announced. Least I can do since consulting probably doesn't come with an expense account. That's very generous, Gerald, I said. Thank you. He smiled. Victorious. Satisfied. Completely unaware that in less than 24 hours, he'd be eating those words with a side of humble pie and a garnish of karma. I stood up, helped Clara with her chair, and prepared to leave the Ivy Garden with my dignity intact and my secret still safely tucked away. Tomorrow morning couldn't come fast enough. If you've never had the pleasure of watching a middle-aged man peacock about his corporate achievements while Eggs Benedict slowly congeals on his plate, let me tell you, you're not missing much. But Gerald Baxter didn't just peacock. Oh no, Gerald full-on strutted, preened, and practically molted his corporate feathers all over the brunch table like he was auditioning for a nature documentary titled Mediocre White Guys in Their Natural Habitat. Brunch was dragging on like a movie that should have ended 30 minutes ago, but the director kept adding unnecessary scenes. You know that feeling when you're watching something and you check your watch thinking, surely we're near the end, and then you realize you're only halfway through? Yeah, that was this brunch. Time had become meaningless. I was pretty sure we'd entered some kind of temporal vortex where Gerald's voice was the only constant in the universe. Let me tell you about real business, Gerald announced, because apparently we weren't done here. The check had been paid. The waiter had cleared our plates. Normal people would have taken this as a sign that it was time to leave, maybe go enjoy what was left of their Sunday. But Gerald Baxter wasn't normal people. He was a man with stories to tell and a captive audience that was too polite to fake a medical emergency and flee. He adjusted his collar. I swear this man adjusts his collar more than a Regency romance character, and launched into what I can only describe as a TED Talk nobody asked for. Baxter Industries isn't just a company. It's a legacy. We move products, not PowerPoints. There it was again. The PowerPoint dig. If I had $1 for every time someone took a shot at consultants and PowerPoint, I could retire tomorrow. Which, coincidentally, I basically could anyway, but that's beside the point. Real business, he continued, warming to his subject like a preacher who just found his rhythm, is about tangible results. We manufacture solutions. We distribute hope. We're in the pharmaceutical industry, for God's sake. We help people. I took a sip of my water to avoid saying what I was actually thinking, which was something along the lines of, yeah, you help people get addicted to opioids, but sure, let's call it hope. Clara's hand was still on mine under the table, probably to prevent me from launching into the takedown I had mentally prepared. It was a good takedown too. Had statistics and everything. I'd done my homework when we were acquiring the company, and let me tell you, Baxter Industries' track record was more checkered than a NASCAR flag. Right? I said instead, keeping my voice carefully neutral. Real business. Making real products. Very tangible. I paused just long enough to be dangerous. Mainly opioids, from what I read. You know that sound a record makes when it scratches to a stop in a movie? That's what happened to the conversation. Gerald's face went through more color changes than a sunset. Patricia clutched her pearls, again, because apparently that's just her default response to anything uncomfortable. Lindsay's mouth fell open in that delighted shock of someone watching drama unfold that doesn't directly involve them. And Derek? Derek looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair and possibly never emerge. Gerald choked on his eggs. Literally choked. Started coughing and sputtering like a cartoon character who just swallowed wrong. Patricia reached over to pat his back while shooting me a look that could have curdled milk. Clara's grip on my hand tightened to the point where I was losing circulation, but honestly, it was worth it. They're legitimate pain management solutions. Gerald finally managed to sputter out, his face now approximately the color of a fire hydrant. FDA approved. Prescribed by doctors. Yeah, I muttered, just loud enough for the table to hear. And French fries are technically vegetables. Doesn't mean we should pretend they're health food. Patricia actually gasped. Like, hand over heart, scandalized Southern Belle gasped. Leo Martins, that is incredibly inappropriate. Gerald's company helps thousands of people manage chronic pain. And addicts thousands more. But hey, at least the profit margins are solid. I said cheerfully, reaching for my coffee cup. That's real business right there. Can't argue with the numbers. Listen, I'm not usually this confrontational. Okay, that's a lie. I'm frequently this confrontational. But usually I have the good sense to keep my mouth shut at family gatherings. The secret to a happy marriage is knowing when to bite your tongue and when to let your sarcasm fly free. Today, apparently, my filter had clocked out early. Probably because it knew what was coming tomorrow and figured I'd earned the right to have a little fun. Gerald was making that face that people make when they're trying to decide between defending their honor or maintaining their dignity. You can't really do both simultaneously, and watching him try was like watching someone juggle while riding a unicycle. Impressive in its own way, but ultimately doomed to fail. The pharmaceutical industry is heavily regulated, he said stiffly, falling back on corporate speak like it was a security blanket. We follow all FDA guidelines. We have compliance officers. We do everything by the book. Which book? I asked innocently. The one with all the loopholes highlighted? Clara whispered urgently next to me. Leo, please. But I could hear the smile in her voice. That's how I knew I wasn't in real trouble. When your wife is trying not to laugh while begging you to stop, you're in that sweet spot of acceptable mischief. Lindsay leaned forward, her eyes sparkling with the kind of glee that only comes from watching family drama that doesn't center on you for once. I mean, he's not wrong, Dad. Didn't you guys just settle that lawsuit about the marketing practices? Oh, Lindsay. Beautiful, occasionally useful Lindsay. She'd just lobbed a grenade into the conversation, and I hadn't even asked her to. Sometimes the universe just hands you gifts. Gerald's eye twitched. Actual twitched. That was a nuisance settlement. No admission of wrongdoing. Standard corporate practice. Right, because innocent companies settle for millions of dollars all the time, I said. Totally standard. Happens every day. Like getting coffee, except the coffee costs 8 figures and comes with a gag order. This is highly inappropriate dinner conversation, Patricia announced, because when you can't win the argument, you attack the premise of having the argument in the first place. Classic move. I respected it, even if I wasn't going to honor it. It's brunch, Mom, Lindsay corrected. And honestly, it's the most interesting brunch we've had in years. Usually, Dad just talks about golf and Derek falls asleep with his eyes open. Derek made a noise of protest, but even he couldn't really argue with that assessment. Gerald stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with that awful sound that makes everyone in a restaurant turn to look. I think we're done here, he announced with as much dignity as a man who'd just been roasted by his son-in-law and daughter simultaneously could muster. Thank you all for coming. Leo, always a pleasure. The way he said pleasure made it clear it was anything but. It was the verbal equivalent of a middle finger wrapped in corporate politeness. The pleasure's all mine, Gerald, I said, standing up to shake his hand. Really, I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed this. Educational, even. He gripped my hand harder than necessary, trying to establish dominance through handshake strength like we were silverback gorillas in suits. I squeezed back just enough to make it interesting, but not enough to turn it into an actual competition. There's an art to the passive-aggressive handshake, and both of us had clearly mastered it. As we all gathered our things and prepared to leave the Ivy Garden, Gerald pulled on his jacket. Designer, obviously, with that little logo that screams, I paid too much for this, and straightened his shoulders. You know, Leo, maybe one day you'll understand what it means to build something that matters. To have a real impact. I smiled. The kind of smile that probably looked friendly from the outside, but was hiding about 17 layers of irony on the inside. You know what, Gerald? I think I'm starting to understand it better than you'd believe. In fact, I'd say my understanding is growing exponentially. Day by day, hour by hour. He nodded, completely missing the subtext again. The man was batting zero on picking up what I was putting down, and honestly, it made tomorrow's reveal even more delicious. Clara linked her arm through mine as we walked toward the parking lot, and she leaned in to whisper, "You're terrible." "Terribly charming," I corrected. "Terribly smug. Can I be both?" She laughed, and that laugh told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't mad. She was entertained. And maybe, just maybe, she was a little bit proud that I'd held my ground against her father's corporate peacocking. As we got into the car and Gerald's BMW pulled out of the parking lot ahead of us, I watched him drive away with the satisfaction of someone who knew exactly what Monday morning held in store. Let him have his Sunday. Let him go home and tell Patricia all about his disappointing son-in-law who just doesn't understand real business. Let him feel superior for one more day. Because tomorrow, Gerald Baxter was going to learn exactly what I'd built. And it was going to be glorious. That evening, I sat in our living room pretending to watch whatever documentary Clara had put on. Something about penguins, maybe? Or was it volcanoes? Honestly, I couldn't tell you if my life depended on it. My mind was about 48 hours ahead, playing out tomorrow morning's scene like a movie director obsessing over the perfect shot. Meanwhile, somewhere across town, Gerald was probably re-watching golf highlights and congratulating himself on another successful mentoring session with his disappointing son-in-law. The mental image of Gerald in his man cave, because of course he has a man cave, complete with a vintage bar cart and framed photos of himself shaking hands with minor pharmaceutical industry executives, was almost too perfect. I could see him there, loosening his tie, pouring himself a bourbon that cost more than it should, and telling Patricia all about how he'd really given me some hard truths today. How someone needed to tell me how the real world works. How consulting was a dead end and I needed to face reality. Little did he know that reality was about to face him. Like a freight train. Made of karma and irony. A karma and irony freight train, if you will. Clara was curled up next to me on the couch, her feet tucked under a blanket, watching the penguins or volcanoes or whatever with actual interest. She's good like that. Actually present in the moment instead of mentally rehearsing corporate takeover reveals like some kind of business revenge fantasist. Which is definitely not what I was doing. Definitely not. "You're smiling at your phone," she observed without looking away from the TV. "You only smile at your phone like that when something's about to happen." "I smile at my phone all the time," I protested. "I could be looking at memes. Dogs doing funny things. The usual internet stuff. You're looking at your email. I can see the reflection in your glasses. Damn. Caught. This is what happens when you marry someone smart. They notice things. Like email reflections. And the fact that you've been mentally checked out of Penguin Documentary Hour for the past 20 minutes. My phone buzzed in my hand, and I definitely didn't do a terrible job of hiding my reaction. Clara turned to look at me fully now, one eyebrow raised in that way that said, "I know you're up to something, and you're going to tell me what it is right now, or I'm going to withhold dessert for a week." It was a text from Marcus and Gwen, my business partner, and the reason Stratton Advisory Group had gone from scrappy consulting firm to consulting firm that occasionally buys entire companies for fun and profit. Marcus is one of those guys who's somehow simultaneously laid back and intensely driven. Like a shark that does yoga. He's brilliant with numbers, ruthless with negotiations, and has a sense of humor dry enough to make the Sahara look like a water park. The text read, "Contract signed. Full acquisition of Baxter Industries confirmed. Board meeting Monday, 9 a.m. You lead." I grinned so hard that even our dog, Pepper, a golden retriever with more enthusiasm than brain cells, looked up from her bed in the corner with concern. Her tail did that questioning half-wag that dogs do when they're not sure if they should be excited or worried. "I felt you, Pepper. I felt you." "Okay, what?" Clara demanded, setting down her wine glass with the deliberate care of someone preparing for important information. "What's happening? You look like you just won the lottery, inherited a castle, and found out pizza has negative calories all at the same time. Remember how your dad spent all of brunch telling me to get a real job?" I asked, unable to keep the grin off my face. "Vividly. I'm pretty sure the entire restaurant remembers. He wasn't exactly subtle. And remember how he kept going on about real business and building legacies, and how consulting is just expensive PowerPoints. Clara nodded slowly, and I could see the gears turning in her head. She's quick, my wife. Always has been. It's one of the things I love about her. She can follow a conversational thread to its logical conclusion faster than most people can follow a GPS. Leo, she said carefully, what did you do? Technically, I didn't do anything. Marcus and I, along with our team of incredibly talented professionals, engaged in a legitimate business acquisition that was months in the making and involved extensive due diligence, legal review, and financial analysis. Leo, we bought your dad's company. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that happens right before something either very good or very bad occurs. Like in movies when the music stops and you're not sure if the next scene is going to be a celebration or an explosion. Clara just stared at me, her wine glass frozen halfway to her lips, her eyes wide enough that I could see the full spectrum of emotions cycling through: shock, disbelief, dawning realization, horror, and then, slowly, inevitably, the corners of her mouth started to twitch. You bought Baxter Industries, she said flatly. Controlling interest, yes. Stratton Advisory Group is now the majority shareholder. My father's company. Technically your grandfather's company that your father works for. But yes, that one. The company he spent all day bragging about. The very same. The company he used as evidence that you don't understand real business. Bingo. Clara set down her wine glass and pressed both hands to her face. For a second, I couldn't tell if she was about to yell at me or laugh. Possibly both. Marriage is all about embracing those uncertain moments. Then she started laughing. Not polite laughter. Not restrained laughter. Full on, doubled over, tears starting to form laughter. The kind of laughter that makes the dog jump up excitedly, because clearly something amazing is happening and she wants in on it. Pepper trotted over, tail wagging at full speed, ready to participate in whatever joy was occurring. Oh my God, Clara gasped between laughs. Oh my God, Leo. You sat there. You sat there through all of it. The corner office speech. The stock options lecture. The get a real job sermon. And you already owned his company. To be fair, the paperwork was still being finalized. We only got the final signatures this afternoon. Does he know? Nope. Board meeting tomorrow morning. 9 a.m. I believe the agenda includes meet your new overlords and discuss restructuring plans. She collapsed back into the couch, still giggling. He's going to die? Actually die? We're going to have to plan a funeral because his ego can't survive this. I prefer to think of it as a learning opportunity, I said primly. Character building. A chance for personal growth. You're terrible. I'm efficient. There's a difference. Clara grabbed her phone and started texting rapidly. I leaned over to see who she was messaging and caught the words, "You will not believe," before she angled the screen away from me. Who are you telling? I asked. Lindsay. She deserves to know. She sat through that brunch too. What are you saying? That she needs to clear her schedule for tomorrow evening because we're going to need an emergency sister debrief session with wine. Lots of wine. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Marcus. I assume you haven't told your father-in-law yet. I typed back. He thinks I'm unemployed but good at PowerPoint. Marcus's response was immediate. This is going to be the best Monday in corporate history. I'm bringing popcorn to the board meeting. Please don't bring popcorn to the board meeting. Fine, but I'm bringing the energy of someone who has popcorn. I smiled and pocketed my phone. Marcus was right. Tomorrow was going to be legendary. The kind of story that gets told at business school reunions and industry conferences. The kind of revenge that was so perfectly timed, so absolutely poetic, that you couldn't have scripted it better if you tried. Clara was still texting with Lindsay, and I could hear the notification sounds of rapid-fire responses. Knowing Lindsay, she was probably already planning what to wear to tomorrow's post-reveal family dinner. This was going to become family lore. The time Leo bought Gerald's company right after being told to get a real job. It would be told at every holiday gathering, every birthday party, every family event for the next decade. Lindsay wants to know if she can be there when you tell Dad, Clara said, looking up from her phone. It's a board meeting. Family members can't just sit in. She says she'll hide in the air vents. That's not how corporate buildings work. She's very motivated. I laughed and pulled Clara closer to me on the couch. The Penguin documentary was still playing, Definitely penguins, I could confirm now. And Pepper had settled back into her bed, satisfied that the excitement was over for the evening. But it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. It was just beginning. Somewhere across town, Gerald was probably asleep by now. Comfortable in his bed, in his house, in his certainty that the world worked exactly the way he thought it did. That consultants were just expensive PowerPoint makers. That his son-in-law was a disappointment who needed to get serious about his career. That tomorrow would be just another Monday at Baxter Industries, where he was important and respected and in control. Tomorrow, he'd walk into his office building like he had 1,000 times before. He'd pour his coffee, check his emails, maybe chat with the receptionist about the weekend. He'd straighten his tie, adjust his collar, and prepare for another week of being Gerald Baxter, regional director. And then he'd meet me, not as Leo Martins, disappointing son-in-law and professional consultant, but as Leo Martins, majority owner of Baxter Industries and his new boss. The universe had gifted me the greatest setup in the history of poetic justice. Gerald had spent months, years, really, setting up the pins, and tomorrow morning, I was going to knock them all down in one perfect strike. I smiled and kissed the top of Clara's head. Tomorrow's going to be interesting. That's the understatement of the century, she murmured, snuggling closer. On TV, the penguins did whatever penguins do. In her bed, Pepper snored contentedly. Next to me, my wife scrolled through texts from her sister, occasionally giggling at whatever revenge fantasies Lindsay was cooking up. And in my head, tomorrow's scene played out one more perfect time. This was going to be good. Monday morning arrived with the kind of perfect sunshine that makes you believe the universe has a sense of dramatic timing. I woke up at 6 a.m. without an alarm, which never happens. Usually, I'm the guy who hits snooze 17 times and considers consciousness before 8 a.m. a personal attack. But today I was up and ready like it was Christmas morning and Santa had left a corporate takeover under the tree. Clara was still asleep, her hair spread across the pillow in that way that would have been romantic if I wasn't too busy mentally rehearsing my entrance into Baxter Industries. I'd picked out my suit the night before, the gray one that Gerald had specifically called pretend business wear at brunch. Petty? Absolutely. Satisfying. You have no idea. Meanwhile, across town, Gerald Baxter was probably going through his usual Monday morning routine, completely oblivious to the fact that his world was about to tilt sideways. I imagined him strutting into Baxter Industries like a peacock who'd just won Best in Show, ready to dispense wisdom and corporate buzzwords to anyone unfortunate enough to make eye contact. And I was right, because I'd arrived at Baxter Industries at 7:30, early enough to grab coffee with Marcus and the legal team, late enough that Gerald would already be in his office doing whatever regional directors do to feel important on Monday mornings. Probably reorganizing his desk accessories, maybe practicing his signature. Definitely not expecting his unemployed but good at PowerPoint son-in-law to walk in as his new boss. The Baxter Industries building was one of those corporate structures that tried too hard to look impressive. All glass and steel, with a lobby that echoed and a fountain that probably cost more than my first car. The kind of building that screamed, "We have money and we want you to know it," without actually saying anything of substance. Very on-brand for Gerald, honestly. Marcus met me in the lobby, looking unusually excited for someone who normally maintained the emotional range of a particularly calm Buddha statue. "You ready for this?" he asked, adjusting his tie. "I've been ready since Sunday brunch," I replied. "This is going to be beautiful. The CEO is already upstairs. HR is prepared. Legal is standing by. We've got all our ducks in a row." And Gerald, in his office, completely unaware. I checked with reception. He came in at 7, grabbed his usual coffee, chatted about the weather. Business as usual. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. We took the elevator to the executive floor, because of course Gerald's office was on the executive floor, even though he wasn't technically an executive. Regional director with delusions of grandeur would be more accurate. But who was I to judge? Well, actually, as of today, I was literally the person whose job it was to judge, but that's beside the point. The CEO's office was at the end of the hall, a corner space with windows that overlooked the parking lot where I could see Gerald's BMW parked in a spot labeled, "Reserved for G. Baxter." The man had a reserved parking spot. I made a mental note to have a conversation about that later. Nothing says regional director who thinks he's more important than he is quite like a personalized parking space. Thomas Chun, the current CEO, soon to be former CEO, but he was being surprisingly gracious about the whole acquisition thing, greeted us with the weary smile of someone who'd been dealing with corporate politics for too long and was honestly just relieved someone else was taking over. "Gentlemen," he said, shaking our hands. "Everything's prepared. The board is assembled. We're just waiting for you to give the word." "Has anyone told Gerald yet?" I asked. Thomas smiled. It was the smile of someone who'd been waiting for this question. "Not a word. He has no idea corporate sold to you. As far as he knows, this is just a routine board meeting about quarterly projections." "When's he being called in?" 9:03. We figured the extra 3 minutes would build suspense. I liked Thomas. He had style. At 9 a.m. sharp, the board meeting began. Marcus and I sat at the head of the table, literally at the head, in the chairs usually reserved for the CEO and COO. Thomas had graciously moved down to a side seat, and the rest of the board members filed in looking like people who'd been told about the acquisition but hadn't quite processed what it meant yet. There were about 15 people total. Department heads, senior management, a couple of board members who'd held on to their positions through the acquisition. They all had that new ownership, energy that comes with corporate transitions. Nervous, curious, trying to figure out if they should update their resumes or not. At 9:03 exactly, Thomas wasn't kidding about the timing. The door opened, and Gerald walked in. And oh, it was glorious. He strutted into that conference room like a man who'd never experienced doubt in his entire life. Shoulders back, chin up, tie perfectly knotted. He had his leather portfolio tucked under one arm, and that expression of practiced confidence that middle managers wear like armor. He probably thought he was being called in to give insights on his region, maybe get praised for his performance, possibly even get promoted. He had no idea he was walking into his own surprise party. "Surprise, Gerald. Your son-in-law owns your company now. Hope you like humble pie because we're serving it fresh." Gerald's eyes scanned the room, doing that thing where you assess who's present and where you rank in the hierarchy. He nodded at a few familiar faces, probably calculating his importance relative to everyone else. Then his eyes landed on me, and I watched, in real time, as his brain tried to process what he was seeing. First came confusion. "That's weird, what is my son-in-law doing here?" Confusion. The kind where you see someone out of context and can't quite place them, like running into your dentist at a grocery store. Then came the flicker of recognition. "Oh right, that's Leo the consultant." The dismissive "oh." Then, and this was my favorite part, came the dawning realization that I wasn't sitting in a visitor's chair or standing awkwardly in the corner. I was sitting at the head of the table, in the big chair, the chair that meant something. "Morning, Gerald," I said pleasantly, like we'd just bumped into each other at Starbucks. I took a sip of my coffee. Excellent coffee, by the way, much better than the stuff at brunch. "Thanks for joining us." His mouth opened, closed, opened again. He looked like a fish that had just realized it was no longer in water, but couldn't quite figure out how it had gotten onto dry land. You work here now?" He finally managed to stammer out. The question hung in the air like a pop fly that everyone knew was going to be caught, but we all wanted to watch the arc anyway. "Not work, Gerald," I said, maintaining that pleasant, conversational tone. "Own. There's a subtle difference, but I'm sure someone with your business acumen can appreciate the distinction." Thomas cleared his throat, trying not to smile. "Mr. Baxter, let me formally introduce you to Leo Martins and Marcus Nguyen of Stratton Advisory Group. As of last Friday, their firm acquired controlling interest in Baxter Industries. They'll be overseeing all restructuring and operational decisions moving forward." I watched Gerald's face cycle through more emotions than a mood ring at a teenager's sleepover. Shock, disbelief, confusion, anger, more confusion, a touch of panic, and finally, that special kind of horror that comes from realizing you've massively underestimated someone. He started, then stopped. Tried again. When did? "The acquisition was months in the making," Marcus said helpfully. "Very thorough process. Due diligence, financial analysis, regulatory approval. You know how it is with corporate transactions. Lots of paperwork. Lots of PowerPoints." I nearly choked on my coffee at that last bit. Marcus, bless him, had delivered it with the exact same casual tone you'd use to comment on the weather. Gerald sank into the nearest chair without being invited to sit, which was very unlike him. Gerald Baxter always waited to be invited to sit. He was a man of protocols and hierarchies. But right now, his legs had apparently decided that standing was too much to ask and had taken executive action. "But you're a consultant," he said weakly, looking at me like I'd just performed a magic trick he couldn't figure out. "Was a consultant," I corrected gently. "Now I'm more of a, what would you call it, Marcus? Owner? Majority shareholder? Your boss." "All of the above," Marcus confirmed. The silence in that conference room was the kind of silence that has weight. The kind where you could hear the air conditioning humming and someone's watch ticking and Gerald's entire worldview shattering into tiny pieces. I opened my laptop, the same laptop I'd used yesterday at brunch when Clara and I were watching Penguin documentaries and plotting this exact moment. "Right then, let's get started, shall we? I've prepared a presentation." I paused for effect. PowerPoint, naturally, since I'm so good at those. Someone at the table made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. I clicked to the first slide. It was titled, "Welcome to Accountability," in big, friendly letters. The subtitle read, "A Restructuring Presentation." Gerald stared at the screen like it had personally betrayed him. "Before we begin," I said, "does anyone need coffee? Water? Antacids?" I looked directly at Gerald. "We want everyone to be comfortable for this." Thomas was biting his lip so hard I thought he might draw blood. Marcus had adopted his best poker face, but I could see the amusement dancing in his eyes. The rest of the board members were looking between me and Gerald like they were watching the world's most corporate tennis match. Gerald opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. This has to be a joke, right? This is some kind of elaborate prank. Hidden cameras? Is this one of those YouTube things?" "No joke, Gerald," I said. "No cameras. Just good old-fashioned business. You know, the real kind. With corner offices and stock options and all those things you mentioned yesterday." I advanced to the next slide. "Speaking of which, let's talk about your region's performance numbers. I've got some questions." And just like that, Monday morning at Baxter Industries became the most entertaining board meeting in the company's history. Gerald sat there, still processing, while I began the presentation that would change everything. This was better than I'd imagined. This was perfect. The silence in that conference room was so thick you could spread it on toast. Like artisanal toast at one of those hipster cafes where they charge $12 and call it elevated bread experience. That kind of thick. The air itself felt heavy with the weight of Gerald's shattered reality and my barely contained satisfaction. Gerald sat there blinking at me like a computer trying to process too much information at once. You know that loading wheel that spins when your browser freezes? That was happening behind his eyes. I could practically see the little rainbow circle spinning while his brain attempted to reconcile. Unemployed son-in-law who needs career advice with guy who just bought my company and is currently sitting in the power chair. You work here now?" he stammered again, because apparently his brain had gotten stuck on that one question like a scratched CD. "Remember CDs?" Gerald definitely remembers CDs. Probably still has a collection of them in his BMW. "Not work, Gerald," I repeated, really savoring each word like a fine wine. "Or like revenge, which, let's be honest, tastes way better than wine." "Oh, there's a subtle difference, but I'm sure a man with your extensive business experience can appreciate the nuance." The CEO, Thomas Chun, who was rapidly becoming my favorite person in this entire building, cleared his throat. He was trying so hard not to smile that his face was doing interesting things. "Mr. Baxter, as I mentioned, Mr. Martin's firm now holds controlling interest in Baxter Industries. He'll be overseeing the restructuring process, operational changes, and all major strategic decisions moving forward." I watched Gerald process this information. It was like watching someone try to solve a Rubik's Cube while wearing oven mitts. Technically possible, but painful to observe. "Restructuring," Gerald repeated slowly, like he was testing out the word for the first time. "Strategic decisions." "That's right," Marcus chimed in helpfully. "Comprehensive organizational review. We'll be examining all departments, all positions, all operational procedures. Standard stuff when new ownership takes over. You understand, I'm sure. Very thorough process." Gerald's face had gone from its usual self-satisfied pink to an interesting shade of gray. Like concrete. Or oatmeal. Uncooked oatmeal that had given up on life. "But yesterday," Gerald said, and his voice had that quality of someone trying to make sense of a dream that had turned into a nightmare halfway through. Yesterday, you were at brunch. You were unemployed. You make PowerPoints for a living. Made PowerPoints, I corrected gently. Past tense. Though to be fair, I'm still pretty good at them. Which brings me to today's presentation. I gestured at the projection screen where my first slide was still displayed in all its glory. Welcome to accountability. A restructuring presentation. I let that sink in for a moment. I worked on this all last week. Really put my heart into it. Used animations and everything. Someone at the table, I think it was the CFO, made a sound that was definitely a suppressed laugh, trying to masquerade as a cough. Nice try, CFO. I appreciated the attempt at professionalism. Gerald tried to laugh. It came out sounding like a car that wouldn't start. This is a joke, right? Some kind of elaborate setup. Punked or something. Is Ashton Kutcher going to jump out of that cabinet? Ashton Kutcher hasn't done punked in like 15 years, Gerald, I said. Also, that show was fake pranks on celebrities, not legitimate corporate acquisitions. Though I can see how you might confuse the two, given how surreal this must feel for you right now. Marcus pulled out a folder, a very official-looking folder with the kind of weight that said legally binding documents inside, and slid it across the table toward Gerald. Everything's documented here. Acquisition agreement, transfer of ownership, regulatory approvals, the works. You're welcome to review it with legal counsel if you'd like. Gerald stared at the folder like it might bite him. How? When did you even? This takes months. Corporate acquisitions don't just happen overnight. You're absolutely right. I agreed. This one took about 8 months, actually. Very complicated process. Lots of late nights, conference calls, due diligence meetings. But we managed to keep it pretty quiet. Corporate was very cooperative about the NDA situation. They really wanted to close the deal before word got out and spook the market. 8 months, Gerald repeated. The wheels were turning now. I could see him doing the math. That means you were working on this during Christmas dinner? Yes. Valentine's Day, when you lectured me about fiscal responsibility? Also yes. That weekend in March when you suggested I look into getting my real estate license as a fallback career? Definitely yes. We were in final negotiations that week, actually. I smiled. But please, continue telling me about the importance of stability and corner offices. I find it educational. The board members were no longer even trying to hide their reactions. A couple of them were grinning openly now. One woman, I think she was head of HR, was literally biting her fist to keep from laughing out loud. Even Thomas had given up on maintaining CEO dignity and was just openly smiling. Gerald looked around the table, probably hoping to find an ally. Someone who would back him up, tell him this was crazy, demand answers about how some consultant nobody had just waltzed in and bought the company. But everyone was either looking at their papers, studying the ceiling, or watching this unfold with the kind of fascination usually reserved for nature documentaries about apex predators. This isn't. Gerald stopped, started again. You can't just waltz in here and take over like this. There are protocols, procedures. The board has to approve major changes. The board did approve, Thomas said smoothly. 2 weeks ago. Unanimous vote, actually. We sent out the memo last Friday after close of business. You might have missed it if you left early. Gerald's eye twitched. Actual visible twitch. I didn't get any memo. It went to senior management, Marcus explained. Regional directors received a different communication. More general. Less detailed. Which is why you're learning about this now instead of 2 weeks ago. The implication hung in the air like a bad smell. Gerald wasn't senior management. He'd thought he was, clearly. Had probably told everyone at the country club he was senior management. Put it on his LinkedIn with strategic capitalization. But in reality, he was middle management at best. Regional director wasn't the same as regional vice president, and everyone in this room knew it except, apparently, Gerald. Right then, I said, clicking to the next slide. Let's talk about your region, shall we? Because I have to tell you, Gerald, the numbers are fascinating. Really quite fascinating. The slide displayed a graph. A very damning graph. The kind of graph that asks uncomfortable questions and demands uncomfortable answers. It showed consulting expenses, Gerald's favorite thing to mock, but these were his region's consulting expenses. Specifically, the educational consulting budget that had somehow ballooned to 3 times the national average over the past 2 years. These numbers are creative, Gerald, I said. using the same pleasant tone you might use to compliment someone's garden. Very creative. In fact, they're so creative that our forensic accountants are still trying to figure out exactly what all this educational consulting actually consisted of. Care to enlighten us? Gerald's face went from gray to red. Those are legitimate business expenses. Educational seminars for physicians. Industry standard practice. Industry standard. I repeated, clicking to the next slide. This one showed a comparison between Gerald's region and every other region in the company. His expenses stuck out like a middle finger in a lineup of thumbs. You know what else used to be industry standard? Leaded gasoline. Asbestos in buildings. Just because something's standard doesn't make it ethical or legal. I was following protocol. Gerald's voice had risen about an octave. He was losing his cool, which was satisfying in a way I hadn't fully anticipated. Everything was approved by compliance. Interesting, Marcus said, flipping through his own set of papers. Because according to our review, compliance signed off on about 40% of these expenses. The other 60% seemed to have bypassed the approval process entirely. There's a note here saying they were pre-approved by regional authority. That's you, right? You're the regional authority. Gerald opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. He looked like a fish doing impressions of a fish. Now, I'm not saying anything illegal happened, I said reasonably. I'm just saying that when new ownership takes over, we like to make sure everything's above board. Transparent. Accountable. I smiled. You understand, I'm sure. Man of your experience and integrity. The HR director, her name was Janet, I remembered now, spoke up for the first time. Mr. Baxter, as part of the restructuring process, we'll need you to provide detailed documentation for all expenses over $5,000 from the past 3 years. The new ownership wants a complete audit of regional spending patterns. That's, Gerald started, then seemed to realize he was about to say something incriminating. That's a lot of paperwork. Luckily, I said cheerfully, you've got time. Because as of this afternoon, you're being placed on administrative leave while we conduct the review. The room went completely silent. Someone dropped a pen, and it sounded like a gunshot. Administrative leave, Gerald repeated. He said it like he was translating from a foreign language. You're suspending me? Not suspending, Janet clarified, because HR always has to clarify. Administrative leave pending review. Fully paid, of course. We're not monsters. You'll retain all benefits during the investigation period. It's standard procedure during ownership transitions when there are accounting discrepancies. Investigation, Gerald said faintly. Routine investigation, Thomas added quickly. Could be nothing. Could be everything. We won't know until we review all the documentation. I clicked to the next slide. In the meantime, we'll need your access card, company phone, and laptop. Again, standard procedure. Nothing personal. Just business. I paused. Real business, you might say. The kind with actual consequences. Gerald stared at me like I'd just announced that gravity had been canceled and everyone was floating now. You can't do this. This is humiliation. In front of my colleagues. Oh, I wouldn't dream of humiliating you in front of your staff, Gerald. I said sincerely. That's what the company-wide restructuring memo is for. HR sends it out this afternoon. We made sure to include your suspension, administrative leave, in the update section. Very professional. Very matter of fact. Janet even included a note about how we're serving cake in the break room to celebrate new ownership. Chocolate. Everyone likes chocolate. Marcus was smiling now. Full smile. He'd given up all pretense of professional neutrality. The cake's really good, actually. We tested a few bakeries. Went with the place on 4th Street. You know the one. Gerald looked like he was having an out-of-body experience. Like his soul had left the chat and his body was just sitting there on autopilot, waiting for someone to reboot the system. Any questions before we continue? I asked pleasantly. Gerald had no questions. Gerald had no words. Gerald had nothing except the slowly dawning realization that he'd spent months mocking a man who was quietly buying his entire world out from under him. And honestly, that realization looked heavy. Good thing he'd have plenty of time on administrative leave to process it all. The board meeting continued, and honestly, it was like watching someone's ego get systematically deconstructed in real time. If TED Talks covered corporate revenge, this would have gone viral. I could see the title now, How to Buy Your Father-in-Law's Company and Destroy His Sense of Self-Worth in Under an Hour. We moved through the slides methodically, each one peeling back another layer of Gerald's carefully constructed kingdom of mediocrity. Marcus handled the financial breakdowns while I provided what I like to call contextual commentary, which is consultant speak for sarcastic observations that make people uncomfortable. Let's look at Gerald's regional performance over the past 3 years, I said, clicking to a slide that showed sales numbers. Interesting pattern here. Sales remained relatively flat, while expenses tripled. That's quite an achievement, actually. Most people struggle to spend that much money without generating proportional results. Takes real dedication. Gerald had gone quiet. Not peaceful quiet. Not zen quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when someone's internal monologue is screaming so loud they can't form external words. He sat there gripping the edge of the table like it was the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly become liquid. That's why I hired 3 former FDA compliance officers to explain it to me. Very educational. They used a lot of words like ethically questionable and technically legal, but definitely sketchy. Really expanded my vocabulary. Marcus pulled up another document on his laptop. We also found some interesting patterns in prescription data from your region. Seems like the doctors who attended your golf seminars, educational programs, wrote significantly more prescriptions for Baxter products immediately afterward, specifically for the medications with the highest profit margins. That's called effective marketing, Gerald shot back, but his voice lacked conviction. He sounded like a defense attorney who just realized his client was absolutely guilty and the jury knew it too. It's called a lot of things, I said pleasantly. Marketing is one of them. Bribery is another. Kickback schemes is a third. The legal team is still deciding which term applies best to your situation. The color drained from Gerald's face so fast I briefly worried about his blood pressure. Not worried enough to stop, mind you, but briefly worried. Thomas Chin jumped in, probably sensing that Gerald was about to either faint or explode. To be clear, Mr. Baxter, we're not making accusations at this time. This is purely an investigative review. If everything checks out, you'll be reinstated with full apologies. And if it doesn't check out? Gerald asked weakly. Then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. I said. Probably with lawyers. Definitely with lawyers, actually. Very expensive lawyers who bill by the 6-minute increment. The kind who wear watches that cost more than mid-sized sedans. Janet from HR cleared her throat. Mr. Baxter, I think this would be a good time to discuss the administrative leave process. You'll need to turn in your access credentials before you leave today. Today? Gerald looked like she'd just told him to report for execution. You want me to leave today? Well, we can't have you accessing company systems during an active investigation, Marcus explained reasonably. That would be like letting a suspect hang out at the crime scene. Not technically illegal, but definitely bad practice. I'm not a suspect, Gerald protested. I'm a 20-year employee with an impeccable record. I clicked to another slide. Define impeccable. Because according to this, you've had 3 formal complaints filed against you in the past 5 years. 2 for inappropriate comments to female staff members. 1 for expense report irregularities. They were all quietly settled by HR with non-disclosure agreements. Sarah from compliance winced. Those were handled at the regional level. Corporate wasn't informed. Interesting how that works, I mused. The regional director investigates complaints about the regional director and finds himself innocent. Must be nice being judge, jury, and defendant all at once. Gerald stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with that awful sound that makes everyone's teeth hurt. I don't have to sit here and listen to this. This is character assassination. Slander. Actually, it's only slander if it's false. Marcus corrected helpfully. If it's true, it's just called facts. Also, since we're in a private meeting and not making public statements, it would technically be libel, not slander. But I appreciate your commitment to legal terminology even when you're using it incorrectly. I stood up too, maintaining eye contact with Gerald. You're right though. You don't have to sit here. You can leave anytime. In fact, you should probably go clean out your desk. Take your personal items. Your motivational posters about synergy. That photo of you shaking hands with the Regional Sales Achievement Award guy. The coffee mug that says, World's Best Boss that you definitely bought for yourself. How do you know about my coffee mug? Gerald asked, thrown by the specific detail. I did a walkthrough last week. Due diligence. Met with department heads, toured the facilities, checked out the regional offices. You were at that golf seminar in Phoenix. The educational one. About pain management solutions and proper swing technique. Gerald's mouth opened and closed several times. He looked around the table one more time, desperately searching for support, sympathy, or at least someone who would make eye contact with him. But everyone was suddenly very interested in their notes, their phones, the fascinating pattern of the wood grain on the conference table. "This isn't over, Leo," he finally said, and his voice had that quality of someone trying to make a dramatic exit, but knowing it's going to fall flat. "Technically, it is," I replied calmly. "That's what administrative leave means. Your involvement with day-to-day operations is over, at least until the investigation concludes. Could be weeks, could be months. Depends on how deep the accounting discrepancies go." "You ruined my career," Gerald said, and there was real pain in his voice now. Not the performative kind he used when he wanted sympathy. The real kind that comes from watching your carefully constructed image of yourself crumble like a sandcastle at high tide. "I prefer to think of it as a career realignment program," I said, keeping my tone light but not cruel. "There's a difference between satisfying revenge and unnecessary cruelty, and I was trying to stay on the right side of that line. Trying being the operative word. Same goal, professional development, just fewer ethics violations. Think of it as forced personal growth." Janet handed Gerald a folder. "This contains information about the administrative leave process, contact information for employee assistance programs, and details about how to access your benefits during the review period. You'll also find information about legal representation if you feel you need it." "If I feel I need it," Gerald repeated bitterly. "You're investigating me for crimes, and you're saying if I need a lawyer." "Technically, we're investigating for compliance violations," Marcus clarified. "Whether those violations constitute crimes is for law enforcement to determine. We're just focused on the corporate side right now." Gerald took the folder with shaking hands. For a moment, I almost felt bad. Almost. Then I remembered Sunday brunch. The mimosa waving. The consulting is code for unemployed speech. The corner office bragging. The 20 years of treating me like I was too stupid to understand how the real world worked. The feeling passed. "Security will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings," Thomas said, his voice gentle but firm. "It's standard procedure. Nothing personal." "Nothing personal," Gerald laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "My son-in-law bought my company, put me on suspension, and is having me escorted out by security, but it's nothing personal." "Well, when you put it that way, it does sound personal," I admitted. "But I assure you, the investigation is purely professional. The satisfaction I'm getting from this moment, that's personal, but the investigation is professional." Important distinction. A security guard appeared at the door right on cue. He was a big guy, the kind who looked like he took his job seriously, but not seriously enough to enjoy it. "Mr. Baxter, I'm here to escort you to your office." Gerald looked at the security guard, then at me, then at the rest of the board. "You're all going to regret this. I have friends in this industry. Connections. I'll land on my feet, and you'll all see that you made a mistake." "I hope you do land on your feet," I said, and I meant it. Sort of. I really do. Just preferably at a company that doesn't mind creative accounting and golf seminars disguised as medical education. I hear there are still a few of those left. Might want to update your resume, though. Maybe leave out the under-investigation part. That tends to raise questions during interviews. Gerald grabbed his portfolio, the leather one he'd carried into the meeting like it was a shield against mediocrity, and walked toward the door. He paused in the doorway, turned back one last time. "Clara's going to hear about this." "Clara already knows," I said cheerfully. "She's the one who suggested I wear the gray suit. Said you called it pretend business wear. Wanted me to wear it today specifically. Marriage is all about supporting each other's petty revenge fantasies." That final detail seemed to break something in Gerald. His shoulders slumped. He looked like a man who'd just realized that not only had he lost the battle, but he'd never actually been winning the war. He'd just been playing a different game entirely while everyone else had moved on to the real competition. The security guard held the door open. Gerald walked through it. And just like that, Gerald Baxter's reign as the most insufferable person in my life came to an end. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than a slam. By noon, the news had spread through Baxter Industries faster than free pizza in a college dorm. The consultant had bought the company. The disappointing son-in-law was now the boss. Gerald Baxter, Mr. Corner Office himself, the man who never missed an opportunity to remind everyone about his stock options and company car, had been officially placed on administrative leave and escorted out by security like a corporate criminal on some bad cable drama about white-collar crime. I stood by the window in what was now my office, formerly Thomas's office, soon to be renovated into something less corporate beige nightmare and more actually functional workspace, and watched Gerald stomp across the parking lot toward his BMW. Even from 5 floors up, I could see the tension in his shoulders, the angry way he yanked open his car door, the aggressive slam that followed. He stood there for a moment, staring at the building like it had personally betrayed him. Then he pulled out his phone and started gesturing wildly while talking into it. Even without audio, I knew exactly what was happening. He was calling someone, probably Patricia, possibly his lawyer, maybe just his voicemail because he needed to yell at something, and explaining how he'd been ambushed, humiliated, destroyed by his ungrateful consultant son-in-law who didn't understand real business. Marcus appeared next to me with 2 cups of coffee from the executive break room. He's been standing there for 10 minutes. Think he's okay? Define okay, I said, accepting the coffee. Physically? Probably. Emotionally? That ship sailed around the time I clicked to slide 3. The golf resort one. The golf resort one. We watched Gerald continue his animated phone conversation. He was pacing now, doing that thing where angry people walk in tight circles because standing still requires more calm than they currently possess. A few employees walking to their cars gave him a wide berth, probably having heard the news and deciding that getting involved in whatever meltdown was happening was above their pay grade. You know what the best part is? Marcus said, sipping his coffee. He did this to himself. We didn't have to manufacture anything. The numbers were real. The expenses were real. The questionable ethics were real. All we did was shine a light on what was already there. That's what makes it perfect, I agreed. This isn't revenge. It's consequences. There's a difference. Gerald finally got in his BMW, and I watched him pull out of his reserved parking spot, the one with his name on it that would be repainted by tomorrow morning. He drove to the parking lot exit, stopped, and for a second I thought he might turn around and come back. Make one more dramatic scene. Demand one more confrontation. But he didn't. He turned left onto the main road and disappeared into traffic, just another angry guy in a luxury sedan having the worst Monday of his life. Think he'll bounce back? Marcus asked. I considered it. Eventually. Guys like Gerald always do. They'll reframe this as a learning experience, tell everyone how the company made a mistake letting him go, land some other regional director position where they can continue being mediocre with confidence. But today? Today he's sitting in that car realizing that the son-in-law he mocked is now his boss. That the consulting nonsense just bought his entire world. That maybe, just maybe, he should have kept his opinions to himself at brunch. I smiled. And that, my friend, is worth every minute of the last 8 months of paperwork. Marcus raised his coffee cup. To PowerPoints. To PowerPoints, I echoed, clinking my cup against his. May they always be more powerful than corner offices and stock options. Through the window, I could see the parking lot where Gerald's reserved spot sat empty. Tomorrow, someone else would park there. Someone who earned it through actual competence rather than tenure and ego. And somewhere across town, Gerald was probably still on the phone, still explaining, still trying to make sense of how the world had turned upside down in one morning. The thing about karma is that it doesn't arrive on your schedule. It shows up when you least expect it, dressed in a gray suit you once called pretend business wear, holding a PowerPoint presentation and a smile that says, "Remember me?" This was going to be a good week. That evening, my phone rang before I even got home. Clara's name lit up the screen, and I could already hear the chaos in the background before I answered. "Leo," she said, half amused, half horrified. "Dad's having a complete meltdown. He says you ambushed him." Ambush is such a harsh word, I replied, pulling into our driveway. I'd call it an educational seminar on humility. Very corporate, very professional. She laughed despite herself. He's been ranting for hours. Something about PowerPoints and revenge and how consultants are destroying America. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "Leo, was this necessary?" I typed back, "So were seatbelts." People mocked them until life hit hard. Clara sighed in my ear. "You could have warned us." "When?" "At brunch." Between the insults and him telling me to get a real job, I locked the car and headed inside. Besides, timing is everything. I'm a consultant. Was a consultant. Whatever. You really waited for the perfect moment, didn't you? I'm a professional, I said. Timing is literally the job. She was quiet for a second, then burst out laughing. God, you're terrible. Terribly effective, I corrected. My family is never going to forgive you. Your family is going to dine out on this story for decades. Weeks later, Baxter Industries was thriving under new leadership. We'd cleaned up the mess Gerald left behind, pivoted to ethical products that didn't require golf resort educational seminars, and actually made money without court subpoenas hanging over our heads. Funny how that works when you run a business with integrity instead of creative accounting. Gerald? He was now in career transition, which is corporate speak for unemployed but too proud to admit it. Last I heard through the family grapevine, he'd started doing motivational speaking about resilience and overcoming adversity, mostly to himself in the mirror, according to Lindsay, who'd become my unofficial spy in the family drama network. The next family brunch was gloriously awkward. Gerald showed up late, avoided eye contact with everyone, and spent most of the meal studying his eggs Benedict like they contained the secrets of the universe. Patricia kept trying to make polite conversation that everyone ignored. Derek looked uncomfortable. Lindsay was having the time of her life. I ordered the executive omelet because subtlety was never my strong suit. Raising my coffee cup, I smiled at the table. To real jobs and normal people. Clara almost choked laughing. Gerald's mimosa trembled in his hand. And as I leaned back in my chair, I thought, some people chase promotions. I prefer acquisitions.